Less than 2 centuries ago, there were 1 billion acres of virgin prairie on the central plains of the United States. A sea of grasses spread from horizon to horizon. The fertility of the land was increasing. Wildlife was abundant. It takes nature millions of years to build healthy soil. It takes man but a few years to destroy it. More than manipulates the life forms below him and creates margins of life for himself and for those plants and animals that he favors. Yet he is still at the mercy of the land. Good soil is a precious and fragile resource. The kindly use of land depends on an intimate knowledge of the intricate and complex ways that nature manages her life-producing factory. Even if one has the good fortune to live in close harmony with nature, learning to care for and preserve the soil is a lifetime task. In the southwest corner of Missouri, there is an 1,800-acre prairie farm owned by Eugene Poirot, a 77-year-old farmer whose career spans the history of modern agriculture. Eugene Poirot came to this farm in 1922. He built a house, sent for his young wife May, and settled down to raise a family. That first year he planted oats, corn, and wheat. All of them failed, and Poirot realized that what he had thought was fertile prairie land had been exhausted by 50 years of cultivation by tenant farmers. Today, 3 generations of Poirots live and work on the farm, which is in the top 5% of all the land in the United States in its productivity. Instead of abandoning the land, Eugene Poirot set out to reclaim it. Using techniques that were first ridiculed by other farmers and later adopted by them, he rebuilt his soil. In that process, he changed his relationship from exploiter to caretaker of the land.
I came to this farm more than 50 years ago. When I came here, I found soil on which the 3 tenants who had lived here before could not make a living, and they left the place. We tried to plow it with a team of mules, and as deep as we could plow was about 3 inches. The ground was white, chalk-colored instead of dark. The ground plowed up in slabs, like concrete slabs, and it was like a piece of stone. My cows suffered from malnutrition of all kinds. My first crop of corn, 80 acres of it, never made a single ear. Now the wildlife revealed the same thing. The wildlife was reduced down to 15 prairie chickens and about 13 quail and a few rabbits, but migrating birds wouldn't even stop here.
What possessed you with this poor land to try to do anything with it?
It was a case of having to do something like that, make it productive, or go broke, go out of business altogether, leave. I didn't expect to do that. This land was here and belonged to my dad, who bought it near 100 years ago. If I had known how bad it was, I don't guess I would even have started on it, see. But the tenants left it, and of course I thought I was pretty smart because I, university graduate, you know.
Well, how did you feel that first season?
I can't express just how I felt. I was disappointed, but I felt that there's a way to make it grow. I was going to find out what it was. But the basic things in back of all of it was this teachings of the prairie, which merely said, if we return to the soil the things that were taken from it, and give nature a time to recreate the values that she had stored there, then you should succeed.
Whether by chance or foresight, half of Eugene Poirot's farmland had never been plowed. This 900 acres remains today as one of the largest tracts of unplowed prairie land in the central United States. For Eugene Poirot, it became a giant outdoor laboratory, a place to observe nature at work.
I figured that I would leave it there to try to learn what I could from what nature had done there, because This is where nature had recreated the soil, starting with a rock. And then I also felt that I had no right to plow the prairie. My job was to make the problem that others had left, the land that was poor, to bring it back to as high a level as the prairie ground was originally.
The rich prairie soils were built up over thousands of years. Cell by cell, creature by creature, nature developed a vast interdependent community of prairie life. These creatures stored and recycled chemicals and energy and converted them into complex organic compounds for higher and higher forms of life. This is the process of evolution, nature's upward progression.
Plant foods come from the rock itself, and then they are made into organic forms, which then die, and they leave in the soil all that they have taken and all that they made in growth. Now when this accumulates, the soil becomes black, as the one we saw over here. Now this dark colored soil is rich in organic materials, and because it is, it can support a heavy growth of vegetation, and the roots hold these additions in place and within reach of new life. Because the soil has organic material in it, it can hold 4 to 5 to 10 times as much water as if it were just rocks or gravel. And here is the organic material that's on the top of it. Here's some of the dead grass being returned to the land. This is nature's law, then, of returning to the soil what has been taken from it.
Settlers pushed on to these plains, killed or drove off the bison and the Indian, and set about turning the prairie fertility into crops to nourish a growing nation. The sod yielded grudgingly to the plow, turning over with a sharp crack to expose the rich soils below. Nature's great storehouse of fertility was laid bare, and the first yields were gigantic. Almost from the first, though, the yields began to drop. Crops were attacked by pests and diseases which had no effect on them before. The soil began to wash away or blow away with the endless prairie wind. Wildlife disappeared. Livestock became weak and thin. By the 1930s, farmers were moving off the land in rapid succession. Sun and wind attacked the dead soil, which had been stripped of its natural cover. Farmers fled the fury of dust storms and abandoned their ruined crops. For thousands of years, nature had maintained a rich variety of plants and wildlife on the prairies. After half a century of man's activities, the soil would grow nothing but a few sparse grasses and poisonous weeds, not even enough to feed a farmer and his family.
It was made less productive, first of all, by driving cattle over it, and secondly then by actual cultivation and by taking the products and shipping them to town. Now that's moving the resource, the plant food resource, away from the environment where it was creating living things, see?
What was missing, though?
Primarily phosphate and calcium.
Using the new technique of soil testing, Poirot was able to identify a number of missing elements. But in many cases, cattle were the means of discovering what was needed, because they showed by their various diseases that there were certain deficiencies in the soil.
My first animals suffered from lumpy jaw, which is a very serious growth on their jaws that turns into pus and breaks and bleeds, and that's due to a lack of iodine in the soil. The calves had diseases such as calf scours. Well, that was a magnesium deficiency. Then the calves would jump over a ditch and they'd break their legs. Well, when these elements were replaced, why, they didn't have any broken bones anymore. When we put some iodine in the salt, we cured up the lumpy jaw.
In the 1920s, there were almost no fertilizers available, and Poirot got them anywhere he could. He bought a limestone crusher and applied limestone to the soil for its valuable calcium. Working with Dr. W.A. Albrecht of the University of Missouri, he was also a pioneer in adding phosphates, potash, magnesium, and other elements to the soil, mostly according to the appetites of the cattle. The Poirots still vaccinate their cattle and consider it a valuable practice, but experience has proved that correction of the mineral imbalance in the soil strengthens the entire food chain and gives nature the tools to ward off diseases in crops and animals. Since the soil was built up, Poirot's cattle have not required veterinary care for major infectious diseases for about 35 years.
If one of the resources are missing, you cannot grow an ear of corn with $1 billion or all the money you can get together. It just don't happen.
Besides destroying wildlife on the prairies, early farming had also destroyed organic matter and soil life. Prairie soil teems with life of all kinds. Some organisms aerate the soil, some hold it in place, and others recycle elements for new life forms. Some of the most important soil organisms are the bacteria which live on the roots of prairie legumes, like Lespedeza. These bacteria take nitrogen directly from the air and make it available for the manufacture of proteins in the prairie grasses.
Chilean saltpeter was about the only nitrate nitrogen that was available at that time. It was a whole lot cheaper to grow the nitrogen and give by way of sweet clover any one of the legumes. We used Lespedeza to provide the first organic matter. Then we could go on and grow these other clovers.
When plowed under, clovers provided the nitrogen and organic matter which made it possible to grow large yields of corn and wheat.
During the summertime when we thrashed our grains, the neighbors would help. And I had one little plot of clover in this wheat field. And one of the neighbors, after a hard day's work, drove his mules right in the middle of that plot and called to me to come on over. And I says, "You are in the middle of my clover plot here. You're doing some damage." He says, "That's why I'm stopping the mules here, to do some damage." If God wanted sweet clover to grow on this flat soil, he would have put it here. You're bringing a curse to the area, go to the land that'll grow sweet clover where God wanted it to grow. And he drove on with his mules. Well, I lived to see the time when this same man had sweet clover as high as his mule's ears, because he found out that it made his land a whole lot better and a whole lot richer.
With the return of minerals and organic matter to the soil, and the use of legumes to fix nitrogen from the air, Poirot had begun to build a system of farming. Modeled after the prairie, the system stressed the efficient use of resources and treated soil management as a responsibility to nourish all forms of life, from microbes to man.
When you provide abundance to nature, she rewards you with abundance. And what I'm talking about is to depend on nature to give the answer as to how she has done it before man made a test tube or a plow or knew how to write his name on a stone wall in a cave.
Another innovation was the use of small round bales of hay left in the pastures as winter feed for cattle, rather than storing the hay in barns. Round bales shed water like a thatched roof, and the hay is available to the cattle whenever they want it.
It costs just about as much to bale the hay, and it costs about that much more, again, to put the hay in the barn. Then it costs about that much more to take it out and feed it in the wintertime when the weather's cold and you'd like to be in back of the stove.
Another advantage to round bales is that manure is spread in the fields by the cows. Extra water is held in the soil by the increased organic matter, and plant foods are returned to the land in organic form and held in place by extra growth of grass. With the application of fertilizers, Poirot's round bale scheme eventually made it possible to support 4 times as many cattle on the land. After the first resource of plant foods had been restored to the land, water became the element in short supply. The problem of water, like the other resources, was how it could be utilized most efficiently. Under natural conditions on the prairie, organic matter and the roots of plants hold water on the land. the water table is replenished, and the water that runs off is clean and pure. Prairie ponds, filled by rainfall runoff, also hold water on the land. Poirot built his first pond during the Great Drought of 1934 to hold water for livestock, but it wasn't long before he was using the precious water for irrigation, though experts had said it was impossible on claypan soils.
Water that's held from rainfall in these ponds and then used for irrigation is supplemental irrigation, and it will increase the net profit by about 50 bushels to the acre in corn. That's 48 inches of rainfall here average in a year, but because the soil is shallow, it can't hold very much water. About all the soil can hold is 1 acre inch of water. Now when that acre inch is gone, which requires just about 1 week, the plants begin to suffer. Now if it goes 2 weeks, then they're suffering pretty bad, and if it goes 3 weeks, you've had a failure. This is a regular farm tractor. We use it in the fields to plow and to disc, but right now it's here for the purpose of running a pump to fill our irrigation pond. It's an 8-inch pump, and it will deliver about 2,500 gallons of water a minute through this pipe that you see here, going on up to the reservoir that you see up there about 400 yards away. From there we water about 25 to as much as 300 acres of land. And of course what makes it cheap is the fact that you can deliver this water to the corn by gravity flow. The cost of drilling a well is between $10,000 and $13,000. And by the time you brought up enough water to put 2 inches of water on 20 or 30 acres of land, it would take a lot of energy, a lot of gas. The cost of those sprinkling units are about $20,000 a piece, so you would have invested perhaps $35,000 or $40,000. Whereas in this particular case, the investment here, this is a pump that's used in the mine field, it costs $300.
Why do you think farmers buy new pumps and equipment?
Primarily because there's some hot salesmen that go around there and sell them the pumps, and they can make about from 20 to 40% profit. And it's advertised in the magazines, and the magazines advertise it because they get paid for doing it. They don't get paid for advertising a pond that will control a flood and offer a sanctuary for migrating birds and a home and an environment for upland game and a place to row a boat and to go fishing. Those are all values, see, that you can't get from a well, and they belong to people, but I don't get paid for them, but I do it because it's cheaper than to drill a well, and I'm in the business just to make some money.
A pond for irrigation or livestock water also creates a place for fish raising, which provides an extra source of income for the farmer and more food for the consumer. Poirot began to do research on raising catfish, minnows, and bass, including the development of a self-feeder for the fish.
When the land is underwater, of course, you can't cultivate it, but you can get a crop off of it if you get a crop of fish, and that's the purpose of this research. The value of fish growing is important enough that a lot of people are beginning to do it. These were fathead minnows. They are particularly adapted for use in feeding other fish, like catfish and bass. In this area here, farmers get 75 to 85 cents a pound for the fish if you catch them yourself. And with my feeder and my harvester, it's possible to feed the fish and grow them up and then to harvest them without draining the pond.
Besides being a valuable food crop, the fish add their manure to the water, making it more valuable for irrigation. The accumulation of fertility and the proper use of resources began to have unforeseen effects. One of them was wildlife, which began to appear to take advantage of the improved environment. 14 years after building his first pond, Poirot realized a long-held dream when great flocks of ducks and geese returned to the farm after an absence of 70 years. Bird life increased, and coons, rabbits, quail, and other animals became numerous. The killing of hawks was stopped, for it was found that they controlled field mice. Poirot encouraged wildlife like prairie chickens because he saw that in the prairie, a full population of creatures kept each other in balance.
Out in the fields, we may destroy the favorable insect, and if nature has a place to reestablish her biological controls, we think that it's worth a whole lot. We have 13 miles of molliflora rows and several miles of hedges. The reason for that living fence is because it's cheaper than any other kind of fence. Those areas that you see on the place here that have not been mowed or particularly cared for, that was deliberately done to give insects a chance to control insects. The last insecticide we had to use to kill grasshoppers and armyworms and other insects like that was in about 1934.
On Poirot's farm, an experiment to convert a fish feeder to a quail feeder is another example of an attempt to promote a diverse, balanced ecology.
You see, there's a lot more to this than I know. But if you give nature a chance to do it for you, you can find out maybe what she's done and then help her. And put this in the front of us, see? It looked like it was covered and then left it.
Yeah.
And then they find a little hole there and they finally come on out. Find teed here, nobody here to disturb them. I see the droppings over there.
Yeah.
See, they've been using this place.
Did we scare them off? Do you
Yeah.
think? Well, I'm sorry about that.
Well, that's all right. Well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get one of these long cords that'll let me go on out there and sit down and wait for them, and I'm going to set my Kodak here. I'm going to train it right onto that thing, and I'm going to snap their picture and have a picture of them about this far away.
And then what are you going to do?
Well, then I'm going to use that for advertising. I say, now, if you want these kind of birds, and you want to raise them and have them on your place, buy ones that come from the bird factory in town, and then put them on out here in the country, and use my feeder to feed them. See? That's it. That's the money end of it, see?
In the early years, Eugene Poirot was criticized for having too many newfangled ideas. More recently, it's been said he's behind the times because he has refused to use some of the modern machinery and new chemicals promoted by agribusiness and industry. But Poirot doesn't see progress as the adoption of every new idea. His research continues, but new techniques are adopted only if they maintain or improve the long-term health of land and its capacity to produce healthy food.
Well, what do you think you're going to get done here?
Oh, I don't know. If it works as good as it has the last couple of hours, it'd take me a couple of days.
Couple of days.
Yeah.
We're doing no-till planting, putting corn in here. With the cattle still in the field, we'd let them graze this down to as low as level as you see here. You can see one grain of corn right here. This vegetation that's on here is heavy enough to prevent any soil erosion. If we regularly farmed this, we'd come in here with a plow and plow it all up and have it tore up for the last 15, 20 days and maybe longer. Instead of having it grow a green crop, we would have lost the pasture that we got off of here in the last 30 days because the ground would be plowed. It wouldn't be able to hold any sunshine during that time or any carbon dioxide or release any oxygen back to the air.
It runs a
a cutter through the ground, and then it divides it opens the furrow up and drops the seed in and then folds it back shut again. We're hoping that we can grow a crop of corn on this and then still have the fescue left for next year, see, and not completely kill it. Just to set it back enough that it'll allow the corn to make a crop, and then in the fall, when fescue normally starts growing again, why it'll recover, and then we'll have pasture in the winter. That's kind of like having your cake and eating it too.
In about one generation, man squandered the fertility of prairie soils. The result was a dark chapter of dust bowls and depression. Science learned to return basic elements to the soil, and in the last few years we have returned more plant foods than ever before. But we have also learned to take much more from the land. Efficiency has been increased with machines, high-yield crops, and new techniques. We may applaud the success of American agriculture, but in many ways we are making the same mistakes as the early farmers who destroyed the fertility of the prairies.
We've recreated a lot of values by putting lime and phosphate and using fertilizers on the land, but our net loss is still great. And in order to see what that is, all you have to do is just look at a stream during a rainfall and you'll see mud going down the stream. Look around and try to find wildlife, and there's none of it left, very little of it. And you have people complaining about the high price of food, and you have farmers going broke every year, and the farm population becoming less and less, and we are losing more than 1 million acres of our cropland every year by either erosion or by roads or by building sites. That's not good agriculture, that's destructive agriculture that finally will bring us into a problem. Got a bulletin that talks about agriculture over a period of 7,000 years. It talks about Mesopotamia and in Egypt where the first oxen were hitched to a plow and civilization began. Now there's hundreds of ruins of cities in the Asiatic, in Africa, and in the Holy Land area. The erosion of the soil and the loss of fertility is what destroyed that area. Now that's what we can look forward to this in this damn country the way we're going. But I guess if somebody had told the old Romans or the old Egyptians that had their bellies full that there would be a time when that would be a desert, they would have thought you were crazy also.
Modern farming wastes fertilizers, energy, and water. It uses technology to upset the biology of agriculture by destroying organic matter and soil life. Weakened crops fall prey to insects and diseases and can be saved only by using poisons. Due to soil depletion and destruction, much of today's wheat contains 40% less protein than wheat grown 35 years ago. Finally, we are using up exhaustible resources at an incredible rate. Chemical nitrogen fertilizers are made with huge amounts of valuable natural gas, and mineral plant foods come from mines which are as exhaustible as the original fertility that nature stored in prairie soils.
We now in the United States are importing 80% of our potash because our potash mines have been running pretty low. Now, they also say that approximately 20 years will be the life of our best phosphate beds in Florida. Then we will have to go to other beds that are not nearly so rich, and the cost of food will be greater, and finally, of course, they can be exhausted. The fertility that is in our crop that now goes to the ocean in sewers should be recycled and held and returned back to the land. All farmers are doing this wrong, even including this one, because we're still sending stuff away from here that isn't recycled back to it. But every time we can come a little closer to that, we save resources. Nature has been doing this for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. Through her process, why there was a continuous buildup of the soil fertility and its capacity to hold water, an increase in the life forms from plants to animals and finally to people. Now that is the natural proof that we can see. The rest of it is that a bank at Lockwood, Missouri, that financed this soil and water restoration idea we're practicing here has grown at the rate of $900,000 a year for the last 6 years.
Well, we needed a very good director, and so we asked Gene if he'd serve on our board of directors. And he's been with us for at least 15 years or a little longer. We did some research and over the years have pressed upon our farmer customers to increase their fertilizer, take soil tests, and so that they have better crop production on the land that they do have. Our town is about 850 people, and we haven't grown too much in the last few years, and neither has the rural area grown. But as I've said before, our bank has increased since 1969 from 6 million to almost 13 million now. So you can see when farmers have money to spend by producing more, they can buy more, the merchants will have more to spend and increase their stocks, and the bank will have to grow too.
We can easily have a permanent type of agriculture that will continue on for many, many generations to come. We have lived 200 years. That's a short time. Let's think in terms of living not only another 200 years, but another 2,000 years, 20,000 years, 200,000 years. In the time clock that Mother Nature keeps and the time clock that has affected this earth, 20,000 years or 200,000 years is merely a short space of time.
In 1928, over 6,000 people attended field meetings at Gene Poirot's farm to learn about some of his experiments with new farming techniques. Today, farmers, scientists, conservationists, and sportsmen still visit the farm, like this group of students from St. Louis University.
Now, Dr. Albrecht told it this way. He says, before one man can love his fellow man, he must not be hungry enough to eat him.
Hey, that's cool.
Now, as I told you down there in the prairie, when you follow this method, then you are increasing the potential to produce. Now, if in addition to that, you see that the sewage and the minerals that we send overseas are replaced and brought back to American cropland, then we can be in business for the next 200,000 years. Well, now we better do it before we get into shape of starvation or for shape of want. We better do it before we get to the same place that we are now with our fuel, our energy crisis. See, why wait that long? If we'd have started the research 50 years ago to take energy from the sun, we'd have it now.
Now, in the city, we try to isolate ourselves from nature as much as possible, and he's right in the middle of it. And this is the way you should be, because you can't really get away from it. The more man tries to take himself away from nature, the worse he messes up his environment. You know?
It makes me appreciate somebody who, does this kind of work and really knows what he's doing, is really trying to improve things for everybody else, too. He's what I would like to think farmers were.
Do some people think you're crazy around here?
Well, I sometimes think I'm crazy myself. But it's all right. I'm still going to keep right on going down this same direction. Whenever anything is correct and it pays off, then it's all right if it's crazy. Then better do it anyway.